Hey everybody, welcome to Bura Tech. In this episode, we're going to be asking the question, should there be a NASA-type organization for medicine? Alright, welcome back. Before we start this video, I want to make sure that you like and subscribe. The more subscribers we get, the more content we can make. It might not mean a lot to you, but if this video got 1,000 likes, it would mean the world to me. Also, this channel doesn't do a Patreon. Instead, we sell our digital products down below. The more money we get from the content that you buy below, the more content we can make. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about NASA. NASA is an incredibly awesome organization. Not only does it have the important goal of exploring the cosmos, but the economic impact of NASA is absolutely amazing. And one of the reasons that NASA has such a good economic impact is because it constantly invents new technologies. And where do these new technologies end up? So as you can see, there's been a whole bunch of technologies that have come out of NASA, and you can probably argue that the world wouldn't be the same without any of these technologies. So where does NASA get its funding? Well, NASA gets its funding primarily from the US government, and other space organizations elsewhere do the same thing. Now the argument is that if you fund NASA, then newer technologies are going to come out, and it's going to stimulate the economy with these new technologies so that other developers can develop these technologies, and thus humanity gets to be more technological. So now with the pandemic, we should ask ourselves, should there be NASA-type organizations but for medicine? And I'm not just talking about infectious disease, I'm talking about medicine in general. So there's a lot of things that haven't been solved in medicine, and the major question is, should we have governments put in money to research and development to make medicine better for everyone? And this would be just like a NASA-type organization, but it would be for medicine. Now this whole global pandemic COVID-19 situation has really highlighted the fact that we should probably put more money into infectious disease. And infectious disease is a huge threat to everyone, as probably everybody knows. But there's a lot of other problems other than infectious disease, and sometimes things might not kill you, but might make your life a lot worse. One of these areas is cartilage. Arthritis really does impact a lot of lives. If you're the least bit active, you'll know that eventually your knees and possibly your ankles or hips might become arthritic, and you won't be able to do those activities at one point in time. And believe it or not, arthritis is a pretty big problem. Of course, it's not as dramatic as, let's say, a pandemic, but it is a problem, and there's a ton of other problems that we should be able to solve. So let's start with infectious disease, because infectious disease is probably the most relevant at this time. So as we know from watching the news, a relatively minor disease can become a big problem across the globe. And this particular disease is not necessarily the most deadly disease, but it is a big problem. That is, people are dying by the hundreds of thousands, and there seems to be no end in sight, at least until we get a vaccine. And one of the things that has happened is that there has been a drug that was used for Ebola that is now being used for COVID-19. And this is absolutely amazing. So somewhere there has been money put into a drug development, and that drug development has led to some other kind of application outside of its original use. And this is the key point. If more money gets put into infectious disease, perhaps some drugs might have an effect on a future pandemic or a local pandemic, which could spiral up into a global pandemic. So the more money that is put in and the more research that is done, the more progress we can make. Side note here, drug development is very costly and very complicated. You can have 100 bottles of promising drugs and maybe only 1 or 2 of those drugs actually make it to market. And even when they do make it to market, they might not be as effective as originally planned. So it is a really big field, and the success rates are very low. This is why you need to have a lot of money being put into it, and there is going to be a lot of money wasted, but progress will be made, because if you want to make progress, you're going to have to waste some time and money, because sometimes that wasting time might lead to a discovery later. And this can be seen throughout any kind of progress. So a lot of people think that if you want progress, you have to give someone money, they'll do some research, they'll get something out there, and then all of a sudden you'll have a new product. It's really not like that. Sometimes it's a lot of small steps that lead to a bigger distance. For example, you can have one study that shows one thing and then another study shows another, and then a drug is developed based on those two studies, but that doesn't really work. But then all of a sudden another drug is produced that was made because of the first trial, and then that works. This is a very common pipeline for drug development. Now, over the years, a lot of people have predicted that a flu would be the major pathogen that would infect the world, and no one really thought that it could be a coronavirus. Now, there are lots of other pathogens out there that could cause a problem. One of the biggest problems facing humanity down the road is bacteria resistance. And this is, of course, antibiotic resistance. All of our medicine today is built on the idea that you can control infections with antibiotics. But bacteria is getting more resistant to it every day, and at one point in time, the antibiotics that are used today might not be effective. This is a huge problem. Now, luckily, there has been some major developments in the last couple years on this issue, but believe it or not, this is something that we need to think about today. Hence, governments should absolutely be putting in R&D to antibiotic resistance today through a NASA-type organization. Now, the best thing about this type of organization is that it can be done practically in any country, anywhere. And what should happen is that the data should be shared freely with everyone, because if we all work together, we can make progress go faster. So not every country has a space agency because it's very hard and very time-consuming and not only expensive to make a space agency, but you can put up labs everywhere. And I think that if governments put in money to research and development, it would have a huge economic effect. Not only would we be able to solve a lot of problems that are facing humanity down the road, but we'll also be creating a ton of jobs. And of course, these are high-paying jobs. So infectious disease is huge, but there's a lot of other issues that need to be solved as well. Now, it doesn't have to necessarily be lab work, that is medicine. It could also be robotics. It's not uncommon to watch a science fiction movie and have a robot perform a surgery. There is lots of backlogs with surgeries all over the place. Now, we are a long, long way away from a robot performing a surgery, but at one point in time, robotics is going to get good enough and medicine is also going to get good enough so that we can actually do that. So let's say you need some kind of knee replacement, then you can just literally walk into a hospital, there can be a robot there, they'll say, hey, how's it going? And you'll get your knee replacement. Now again, this will happen in the future at some point in time, but if governments put in the money to making this a possibility, and if there is a lot of private investment as well, then this can probably happen. Now, of course, the last example is a very futuristic example, but I think the holy grail of one of these organizations would be to severely limit death. And this might sound like a very blanket statement, but what I mean by that is to severely limit aging. Now, research is way farther along than most people think in this area. In fact, we know exactly why people die from old age. And in the last 30 years, there haven't really been any items that we've added to the list. So we know exactly what the problem is, which is absolutely huge. If you really want to know more on this, you can check out this TED Talk and he will explain everything. But for the most part, what you need to know is that the research in this area is way farther along than people think. Now, what would be absolutely amazing is if you could take a pill and then in a year of life, you could go down a year in age. And this adds to the idea of a biological age versus a physical age. You could have 3 people at 30 years old, and one person might have a biological age of 27, and another person might have a biological age of 40. So that means those 3 people that are age 30 might be 27, 30, and 40, and they will all have the same effects of people relatively in those ages. So the best thing that would probably happen is if you could just take a pill, and for every year of life, you would lose a year or possibly 2 in terms of biological age. So that means if you were 40 today, then if you were to take this pill, then in 10 years, you will actually be a biological age of 30. Now, this is a very hard thing to do, but it is not impossible. And one of these NASA-type organizations for medicine might be able to do that. Now, of course, this doesn't add to the issue that if people start living forever, what ends up happening? That is a story for another time. So what do you think? Do we need a lot of governments putting money into research and development, making NASA-type organizations but for medicine? I want to know. Please leave your comments down below. Remember to like and subscribe, and if this video got 1,000 likes, it would mean the world to me. It might not mean a lot to you, but it would mean the world to me. And remember that this channel doesn't do a Patreon. Instead, we sell our digital products down below. The more money we get from the products you buy below, the more content we can make. If you really like this channel, you can subscribe to Mammoth Interactive's huge library of content. We have everything from game development tutorials to machine learning tutorials to Photoshop, Blender, and many more tutorials. We release 20 to 60 hours of fresh new content per month. If you're already a subscriber, thank you so much. Not only do you make this YouTube channel possible, but you make Mammoth Interactive possible. It's the best way to help with this channel. We have monthly options and yearly options. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in another video.